Okay, guys, this video we're going to talk about like recones or, drop-in recones and why they became a thing. And also, we're going to clear up some of the misinformation that certain people's told you about this. And we're going to go over a couple of things about recones. But before I do, I showed you guys how to get the surround off the frame on that L5, like the easiest way to do it. And also, by applying heat here, getting under it and just working it around. I told you could do the same thing at the spider landing, and I actually recorded a video of disassembling that subwoofer and pulling the assembly out clean. But during that video, when I was recording it, some things just really concerned me quite a bit, and I'm just choosing, by using my better judgment, not to upload that video. I don't want to throw any negativity towards Kicker, the brand, or any of their products, but there is sometimes that I want to make you aware of the products that you're buying. And again, guys, I don't bash any of these brands, but I just want you to be aware of these things. So it came out exceptionally easy. I mean, it kind of blew my mind how easy it came apart. And then when I would do like old CBRs and CBXs and L7s and stuff like that, when I would do them, I would take the spider and cut it as close to the coil, because what I would do is I would push on the coil pretty hard and just snap it all the way around out of the voice coil collar and the neck, and it would just fall out and you could clip the wires. But when I was cutting the spider out of it, like I was barely applying any pressure, and this coil just started breaking loose extremely easy. And you can do that with these because they use Kapton. They use a lot, in a lot of their drivers, they use Kapton. So does JL Audio, all the way up into the W7s. And while there's nothing wrong with Kapton, it's just cheap. It's got high heat resistance as well, but it's just cheap. And one of the benefits of using Kapton is like under heavy excursion, when you start to get coil wobble or coil rock, when Kapton rubs like the pole, like you normally just really don't hear it. But if it was aluminum or something like that, you would start to hear it. So that's one of the benefits. But anyways, this coil came out of the voice coil neck, like the coil collar, and out of the cone neck extremely easy. So while I was holding it then, the coil, after I snipped it loose, and I was just going ahead and just knock the rest of the spider off, the spider popped loose. And so one of the concerning things for me was, if you look in here, if you can see in there, there's very minimal glue that held that spider to that coil. And that's how it goes on there. Like that neck goes up into the neck of, like if you can see, the collar portion of that spider goes up into the neck of the cone, with the former. But there's absolutely no glue on the bottom of that spider that held it to the coil itself. It just concerned me quite a bit. And I just want to show you guys that. Again, I'm not being, I'm not bashing them. Sometimes guys, I'm honest with you. And I just wanted you to see that and know that. So moving on, we're going to talk about recones and like why they became a thing. And again, I'm going to clear up some of the, like the crap you guys are being told. So I'm going to go back to the 90s, right? Like the early 90s when I got into car audio. I was already into home audio as a teenager and stuff, and got into car audio. So back in the day, we were doing the very exact same thing you're doing now. We were wiring amplifiers in the dirt, trying to extract as much power as we could. We were pushing our woofers to the limits, trying to get as much output as possible. You guys do the same thing today we were doing then. The only difference is, technology has advanced from then. We also were paying, dollars per watts, where today you typically pay, cents per watt. Power is a lot cheaper today than it was back in the day. And, we've got bigger subwoofers, they've got stronger motors, bigger voice coils, better materials, things like that. So the only thing that really changed was technology. It just started advancing. So back in the day, you popped a woofer, what did you do? You just tossed it and replaced it, right? So as time went on, like say around 2000, you had MTX. They came out with the RFL. And I don't know if you guys remember them, but they had like a red frame, inverted surround, and they had a field serviceable recone. You blew that woofer, you just popped in a new recone. And then like a year or two went by and Kicker came out with the Solo X and their spares, which was field serviceable. And later on, HCCAs by Run, they had the same thing. Memphis came out with them. I mean, hell, even Image Dynamics. But the thing is, other manufacturers would offer you like, you got to shim it and glue it in. But other manufacturers started seeing the trend, and getting with the times because they were noticed that people were just pushing their products well beyond their limits until they failed. So instead of buying a new complete subwoofer, they would offer you a drop-in at a fraction of the price. So this is when recones started becoming a thing. That's why. It wasn't because like some of you guys were talking to me about this, about manufacturers was knowingly selling you a product that they knew were going to fail just so they could make money off of you. Guys, that is absolutely not true. I mean, just from a business standpoint, that would be absurd to do, right? So, like way back in the day, right before the internet became a thing, it would take time for shit to travel around in circles and across the audio scene. If a product was bad like that, of hey, just don't buy that shit anymore. But we live in a day and age of where everybody is on the internet. So I'm going to try to make this make sense for you guys. So let's call this a brand, like this is brand Z. We're not going to use any brand at all. We're just going to say this subwoofer here is brand Z. And it's rated, they say it's rated at 1500 watts, right? And so you like the way it looks, you think it's going to perform well and so forth, and you go out and buy it. And you get it home, you got a bunch of buddies over, and they see it and they like it, and they're like, damn, I'm going to go buy it, right? All right. So you build an enclosure to spec and whatnot, and you're only putting about 800 watts of clean power to this subwoofer. You're not abusing it. You're not clipping it. You didn't build an overly large enclosure and tune it in the dirt. You kind of went by the guidelines that the manufacturer, said to use. And after a couple of days, the voice coil fails. And you put about 800 watts of clean power to it. So your buddies over here are doing their installs, right? When this happens to you. And you reach out to the manufacturer and they're like, well, we don't warranty blown voice coils, but we do offer a drop-in at a fraction of the cost. So you buy one. So you're waiting on it to get there. And then you start to see your buddies are having the exact same problem, although they didn't abuse their subwoofer either. And then the next thing you know, you're seeing about it online from other individuals like all across the US, right? But then let's say it's offered in other countries. And then you start seeing people in other countries talk about it. And while people may say, oh, it was a fluke the first time, they get a recone. Well, you got your recone. And guess what? That shit happened again. So how long would it take before people's going to say, man, don't buy that shit. It's junk. At some point, that's what everybody's going to say, and nobody's going to buy that product anymore. And then in time, that company's going to fail and tank. They're going to close their doors. So I hope you guys understand that. But let's just use that analogy that a manufacturer would knowingly design a product and sell it to you that they know is going to fail. We could use, I don't know, let's use JL Audio for an example, right? You pay a hefty price for their products. Even their lower tier stuff is, it's still kind of costly, right? But what is the number one thing on a JL Audio subwoofer that fails? What's the number one thing that fails on it? Just think about it for a minute. The surround. From way back. Even on their products today that are still available, that are, decades old, right? They didn't change the technology or even address that, is the surrounds. Now, do I think that JL Audio is selling you a product that they know is going to fail like that? No, I don't. I don't think that one bit at all. The problem with that is like the materials used for their surrounds is just shit. It's garbage. I've seen them less than a year old fail, get creases and cracks in the apex of the surround just from day to day use. And then they deteriorate, really quickly. But I don't believe that JL Audio knowingly sells you a product that's defective like that, just so you'll spend money with them. Like I know you used to have to send that product back to them for repair, but then, you know, you started to be, you got to where you could buy those surrounds for like all different drivers they sell off the same tooling. But guess what? The materials used for those surrounds are much better than what they had. You can buy replacement voice coils aftermarket, spiders, and like all kind of parts for JL subwoofers. So like I don't think that they knowingly did that just to take your money. That makes no sense from a business standpoint. If that were the case, at some point somebody would be like, stop buying JL Audio's products, man, and they wouldn't have been around as long as they've been around. Again, subwoofers are failing because of you. And like how I used to be way back in the day, pushing shit beyond its limits until it fails. Guys, you're putting like twice and three times the rated power on subwoofers. And while they may take it for a while, eventually they will fail. They're not designing flaws into them like that, like knowingly designing them that way to fail. So you just keep it dumping money into their product. That makes no sense whatsoever. And this shit with recones became a thing when those big surrounds came out. That is an absolute lie. Recones were available long before that because you push shit beyond the limits. We'll use Sundown, for instance, right? When Jacob Fuller first started designing and engineering the mega platform drivers, they were designed and engineered to have a lot of excursion and to stay linear during all that excursion to a point, and to also be very low distortion, which is what they are and what they do. Even today. It had nothing, when those subwoofers failed, it had nothing to do with surrounds whatsoever. They failed because you pushed them too far, and so they met their failure point. So let's say that one of their subwoofers had 30 millimeters of excursion, right? One way. And it would stay linear, the surrounds wouldn't dimple or stretch, and it was still low distortion. But then you drove that subwoofer to 40 millimeters of excursion one way, right? So then you might start to stretch the surround a little and get a little bit of dimpling, but it still did not fail. But let's say you pushed it to like 45 millimeters of excursion, and then you start really dimpling the surround. But it still didn't fail mechanically. It didn't bottom out, jump the gap. He designed them that way because he knew people were going to push that shit beyond their limits. But at some point, over time, that subwoofer is going to fail because you just keep throwing more and more power to it for longer periods of time until it just fails. It had nothing to do with the surround, guys, whatsoever. Stop listening to people tell you these things. The shit makes no sense. They don't know what they're talking about. I honestly believe sometimes that people just sit and think shit up just to talk about it, or always want to keep a manufacturer's name in their mouth, for just no reason other than to just, get clicks and views or whatever the reason may be. You really could just take the time and think about things like this, or even do your own research. Recones were a thing long before Sundown. And if Sundown was such a horrible product, like some people say, right? If it was such a horrible product, people would have stopped buying it a long time ago. But they don't. Why? Because they're great performing. Like a lot of their products perform great. And they perform well above what they were supposed to, they perform and exceed the limits of what they were designed to do. And they still hold up. They take a lot more power than they're rated. People push them beyond like I just showed you, like the 30 millimeters of X-Max, right? One way. Some people push them well beyond that and they still don't fail mechanically. Just because you don't like a product or it didn't fit your niche, you can be mad about that all you want to. But at the end of the day, if they were a bad product, they wouldn't be around. And they didn't offer recones just to take your money. They offered recones because you just pushed that shit way too far until it failed. And then it came, like you guys were talking to me about people like me that do recones and stuff like that, right? Well, I was just told you just throw random shit together and call it, like a custom subwoofer, or you paint the basket and this and that, and then it's custom. And that shit is nonsense as well. These people are feeding your head full of that shit, right? How much of their money have they invested in bringing a product to the table that's better than someone else's? How much time have they spent in designing and engineering a product and doing all the R&D to bring that product to the table? No, they're not. But they also want to tell you how to fix other people's, like fix other brands' problems when there's not a problem to fix, like I went over in the last video. They can tell you how all that product would be this, be so much better if it was blah, 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 and this and that, right? But yeah, guess what? Again, guys, they're not they're internet engineers. They're internet experts, right? They're not designing and engineering a single thing. They're not bringing anything to the table except just running their mouth. So I kind of hope that clears that up, because, people like me, we've done this there's a lot of guys out there that do this, that do great work. But a lot of us learned a long time ago that we can, when you have a manufacturer that don't offer recones, right, or drop-ins, but they have things called TS parameters, and they list things like the moving mass. We learned a long time ago how to mimic that shit. Because guess what, guys? Vendors like George at Lord of Bass, right? We'll use him as an example. Or Springfield Speaker and all that. When you buy any parts from them, they give you the physical dimensions of that and what it weighs in grams, right? You can mimic the moving mass. Like cones, you can get they list the physical dimensions of the cones and what they weigh. Spiders, physical dimensions, what they weigh, and the compliance of a spider. But then again, you got these same individuals talking shit about people that do things like this, but they're not doing it, are they? No, they're not. You have to stop listening to that. I'm sure that some of you guys that I've done work for can chime in here. Did you not like the product that I gave you back? Did it not perform just as good or better than what it was when it was stock? Not all of us are hacks like these that are talking shit. Again, they don't do any of these things, but they know so much, right? I'm not going to drag this video out anymore, guys. Like, I'm not. And I don't mean to sound like upset about it. But guys, this shit you're being told is absolute. It's crazy. And like some of you guys like eat that up and think that you're listening to people talk about talk about these things like they know what they're talking about when they do not. So I'm not going to go into any more detail or anything like that. I just wanted to touch on it and let you guys know that most of every bit of that is just, it makes no sense from a business standpoint whatsoever to sell you a product that, they're selling you a product that they know is going to fail, so you'll keep dumping money into it. I just explained several reasons why that makes no sense. I also tried to explain to you why recones became a thing, and even go back to when they first started becoming available. And not everybody out there that says, oh, I can do a recone for you or whatever, not every one of them out there are just throwing random shit together and hoping that it works just because it fit. Okay? I'll see you guys next time.